Hello, everybody. Bob Oxley here. It's time for tips, topics, issues, and positions. And today's topic is going to be the current government shutdown as we enter into the 21st day. So it is the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. And to discuss the issues and that go along with that government shutdown, as well as to try to ascertain their positions, I have two members of the faculty of Dixie State University in the College of History and Political Science. I have Professor Chip McLeod and Professor Joe Green have been kind enough to return to our studio to give us their expertise on this current crisis. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
I'm glad you had time to come back. I know it's we're just concluding with the first week of classes here at Dixie State, and I know you're really busy, but we really needed. I had a lot of calls from our listeners saying, can you talk about this, because we're not sure what's going on, and we have such a wide variety of opinions on this. I'd like to just open it right up with you, because I know there's a lot for us to talk about. But here we are. We're in day 21 of this government shutdown. And it apparently that our president, President Trump, is adamant about getting this wall built between Mexico and the U.S. And just as adamant is the Democratic Party saying, no, we're not going to give you $5.7 billion for it. Based on what's going on as far as the people that are affected, we have between 800,000 and almost 1 million people. Give me your assessment of this is going to be really the first day, the 21st day of the shutdown, but really the first day where these workers are not going to be paid. Any ideas based on your expertise and what you've read about this? What's going to be the feedback? What do you foresee going to happen as far as this shutdown? Are we going to see the general public or the people who are directly affected rise up? I know there's been some protest across the country, so I'm going to turn it over to you two and give me an idea of what your opinion is on that.
Well, the only thing that I would say, I guess is kind of obvious, but let's put it out there. It's a shame that these folks have to become the pawns in this enthusiastically partisan political fight. And here's hoping they get their money, but it's hard to tell what the president really wants. I guess he wants the wall. I'm not really sure. He wants support of his base, and I think a lot of people, no matter what happens, it appears, to these folks who aren't going to get paid today and that kind of thing. Our politics have gotten really, really strange now, and pardon me, most of them, I don't know, will probably hang with him. It's unfortunate, though.
Professor Green.
The other point of view is that the Democrats, too, don't seem to know what they want other than to keep Trump from keeping a campaign promise, and don't seem to have any negotiating stance other than no on this thing that he wants. And their base is really solidly against doing anything that looks like a wall, because they think it's immoral and it won't work, and but it's pure partisan. You know, both sides, I think now, and I don't see a way out of it. There's some compromise that you can think of, such as legalizing all the dreamers, kids who were brought here when they were children who have only lived here, who are illegal, in exchange for some funding for the wall. But Lindsey Graham was trying to get a bunch of senators on both sides to agree to that, but the president killed it last night, so that's not even on the table anymore. So who knows what's going to happen?
And will he go ahead and perhaps cross the line and declare some sort of supportable national emergency and dip into the Pentagon, the Defense Department, that funding that is unearmarked to go there, and then Will there be some extended court fight about that? I mean, how far is he willing to go?
Yeah.
They fund the Army Corps of Engineers and the Defense Department for emergencies, and that usually means hurricanes and earthquakes and forest fires and stuff like that, where a government response is needed and there needs to be a pot of money. And in theory, at least Trump's people are telling him he could use some of that money and start building a wall. And there's way more than $5 billion there. Since it was earmarked for natural disasters, I'm not sure that how the courts would look at that, but who knows?
Yeah, he made a statement. The president came out 24 hours ago indicating that with the Army Corps of Engineers to investigate using funds for relief, both in California fires this past summer, because he claims that the Californians didn't handle the fires correctly to stop them. And also he might as well throw in Puerto Rico. He said, don't you think enough money's gone to Puerto Rico? We should use some of the relief funds and put that toward building the wall. There was some pushback on the bipartisan pushback on those ideas. I guess the next thing that the president has been trying to put together and lay a foundation for is a crisis between the United States and Mexico. Any input on that? Any feelings on that? Is there a crisis?
I don't know how they're defining crisis, and what part of what I would have to say about that is that this is really perversely entertaining political theater that seems to change almost by the day, if not by the hour. And the thing I would toss in has to do with the facts and figures that seem so outrageously different in terms of they want to count how many people have tried to illegally enter the country, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, and the folks who seem politically and even emotionally wedded to some pretty, what appear to be some pretty inaccurate figures, want to push those in order to tug on people's heartstrings and this, that, and the other. But in terms of anything concrete that's coming of this, right down to, and when I talk about political theater, I mean politics is, wow, it doesn't get stranger than it is now, does it? And the thing that I think about a lot as well is I don't know what the president was up to the other day when he went to that meeting and stayed for whatever 5 minutes and listened to what the Democrats had to say, and just we're not talking turkey at all. See ya, and then it's not helpful at all. The way he's characterized, I think Nancy Pelosi has been waiting so long to do this. She just sort of loses control a little bit, and I don't think her rhetoric's very helpful.
Well, I know that there was even discrepancy what transpired in that meeting.
Right?
Did he slam his hand down and say, "I'm out of here because you won't talk to me about my wall," or did he just kind of like get up and walk out and say, "We have nothing further to discuss"?
Well,
whatever. You get both bipartisan interpretation, even in what transpired in that meeting. So for us to even consider a compromise being reached at this point, at this juncture of this shutdown, it's getting wider and wider, and they've painted themselves into corners. I have a question for both of you, just going backwards a little bit. It seems to me, prior to the shutdown, that the Senate had a proposal, a set of 7 sections to a proposal, of which number 7 had to do with the wall. And the other 6 proposals had to do with moving the government forward and had to do with funds for things that were outside of the wall. And
are you talking about the appropriations bills?
Right. There were 7 parts to it, and the president. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I do need your correction on this if necessary. It's been stated that the president agreed to signing the verbiage, the way it was set up, that was passed by the Senate, and when it got to his desk, he refused to sign it because it didn't include the wall, funds for the wall. can you clarify that? I know that my listeners, they called this. I don't understand what happened. Why didn't we just sign the 6th and then focus in on the 7th part of this proposal?
The standard way, normal procedure in the House and the Senate every year is to fund the government with 13 appropriations bills, they're called. Now, in recent history, we haven't ever done this because the two sides can't ever agree on how much each department needs to get. And so they end up, during the whole Obama administration, they ended up putting it all in one big package, take it or leave it, fund the government at the end of the year with all the appropriations bills in one big super bill.
Okay.
This year, the Republicans were going to try and show that they knew how to govern and get back to what they call regular order. And so very early last year, the House started passing the 13 appropriations bills, and the Senate got through all but, was it 6? I think that's
there was 6.
Something like 6. And so most of the government, 3/4 of the government has been funded because those initial appropriations bills were all signed, passed by the Senate and the House and signed by the President. 6 were remaining right before the election, and everybody went home thinking they'd pass them after. And that's when the President started saying, I may not sign them because they're in the Homeland Security bill, one of the 6. We don't yet have enough funding for the wall. I want $5 billion for the wall.
Okay.
You only have $1.6 billion for the wall. Okay. Now the president's thinking is there are 6 outstanding bills that haven't been signed, which means as of today, the people who work in those agencies, unless they're defined as necessary, aren't getting paid. Okay, that's what the shutdown is because there's no money for Agriculture Department, Homeland Security, I forget what the others are, and that's what the fight is about. And in the meeting, the reason the president walked out, he claims, is that he asked Mrs. Pelosi, if I sign all of the bills but the Homeland Security bill, will you then give me the wall? And she said no, and he says, then we have nothing to talk about. So again, it's this impasse. But he thinks that by not signing the 6 and shutting down the government, he can put pressure on Mrs. Pelosi and some members of her caucus to, because they're worried about portions of the government not working, come to the table and give him his $5 billion. Of course, they think that the pressure of the government shutdown will be felt by Republicans. It normally is. And because Democrats generally are in favor of government, they would never shut it down. Republicans tend not to like government, so they're the ones who would shut it down. That's kind of looks like kind of the way the country thinks about this. And so that's the issue. That's the debate they're having right now.
Okay.
And they're essentially playing, it looks like a game of legislative chicken.
Yes.
To see who's going to veer first. And Trump still seems very confident. And back to the people being affected by this, it must be very strange for them to hear him continually say that we'll leave the government shut down as long as we need to.
Yeah,
years. In fact, he said.
Yes, yeah.
He said, just let it go the way it's going. I to go along with that. The people that are definitely going to feel it today, the ones that are not getting their paychecks, because they were holding back on mortgages, and there's all sorts of stories coming out now. The one that really shocked me was the Coast Guard on their website said that recommendations, because we're not going to be able to pay you. You're supposed to hold garage sales.
Right.
You're supposed to put your shingle out that you walk animals and pets. That actually was on their website, and they were blasted, and they pulled it off the website. That happened this morning. Yeah. I mean, there's insensitivity. They did. They were just.
I mean, when do they do this? After their shift? After you've been out? You know, the Coast Guard's on 12, 14-hour shifts because you take the boat out, you can't come back after 8 hours.
I think they want the people that they're partners to do all this on the side. They did pull it off, but this is the kind of insensitivity, and this is why these 800,000 that are directly affected by this feel like they are what Dr. McLeod said at the onset of the show. They feel like pawns. They feel like pawns and being taken advantage of.
Well, they are.
No, yeah, they are.
This is the bishops and the kings and the knights in the back row sacrificing pawns to get better position.
And the king and the administration are getting paid. They're receiving their checks.
But they're not. Some of them have said we won't take them while the shutdown's going on. That makes
or they're raised, by the way.
Yeah, or maybe not their raise. Yeah.
Maybe not their raise. Let me throw out one more thing at you when we're talking about this. What about the people that are? I know 800,000 furloughed, but some of those 800,000 are working without pay, like air traffic controllers. We've got the TSA at the airports, security at the airports. They're not being paid, but they're being required to come into work. And then there's those that are furloughed that don't come to work. Just you're done working. We'll let you know when the government becomes active again. Are those people going to get paid when they get called back, or when this hopefully this shutdown ends?
They're telling them they are.
And legislation one of the bodies, the Republican House or the Senate, introduced legislation to make sure that people would get the back pay that they didn't get during the shutdown. So I assume they will be. But, if the shutdown goes many months, people are going to have to look for another job. They can't stay in.
And I wonder if the budget from this fiscal year carries over to next fiscal year, if it goes past October the 1st.
Well, the funding is there to pay them.
Okay.
If the bills are signed.
All right.
Then the funds are released, and so the fact that it's not going out now means that they get a great big check. In theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take it to the worst scenario here. Let's say that a month from now, I ask you two to come back, and nothing's been resolved. Outside of the 800,000, we're talking about possibility of not having food stamps, certain government mortgages not available any longer, the IRS refunds.
The Republicans have kind of prepared for this. And when the government shut down in 2011, President Obama knew the Republicans would get the primary blame for it. And so the people in the departments tried to make it as onerous on the American people as they possibly could. You remember they shut down all the national parks, including the World War II Memorial, and a bunch of World War II vets had shown up, and they went past the – you remember all of that and that kind of thing. The Republicans are taking the opposite stance and trying to make sure that all of the stuff that might cause them real problems. Now, all of this is eventually going to cause somebody real problems, and it's going to be what changes it. But food stamps are going out. They've made sure that that's going to happen, and that things are in place so that the tax returns and all of that will. There are things you can do, funds that are kind of general and not allocated that the department heads can use to make this less harmful than it would be. So but that's again the chess pieces playing with the pawns here. So President Obama used them one way in order to put pressure on the Republicans. The Republicans are using it another way to keep pressure off themselves in this particular one.
And there are reports that members of TSA, for example, who have to do their jobs are not real pleased. Morale is not particularly good, as you might imagine. And these days, they do some pretty important work, and I can only guess at how that might or might not affect the vigilance with which they're doing their job. So that could be.
My guess is that's the bottleneck, the TSA,
yeah.
And that if the airports start shutting down because the TSA and their union, I'm not showing up to work if I don't get paid, kind of a thing. You can't. I don't know if you could legally force them to work without pay.
Well, Reagan did for the other. Once again, we're in the age of some really interesting constitutional interpretations, or sort of throwing ideas about that. That would just wreck things if air traffic got all out of hand.
Yeah, I remember you're talking about when PATCO was here, the Professional Air Traffic Control Organization, and Reagan said there is no union as far as air controllers is concerned.
And with security being as important as it is today down on the ground, who's to say that somebody might not pull that if they push back with their union, with the idea that, first of all, they're not getting paid, and this is kind of absurd.
If we start getting airports shut down or people not feeling safe to travel, it seems to me that'll be the bottleneck where you're going to get a lot of pressure on somebody to negotiate in good faith, that come to a table and negotiate. But who knows? The two sides really don't like each other. And
that's obvious.
And the other thing that springs to mind as well is that Trump, in his language, his approach, and the way he conceptualizes this, last I heard, he's not even playing with the semantic game anymore. We want a wall. People are talking about screens and slats and what are we going to build it out of, and concrete, steel, whatever. He wants a wall.
That's his focus.
He used the word concrete again. He kind of moved off that because the Democrats said we're thinking steel rather than concrete. Yeah. So
I don't know if you saw it this morning.
That sounds silly to me.
I don't know who planted this one, but there's a picture of a part of the one of the steel walls that were some of the samples that they had for him to take a look at, and somebody had actually cut a square into the steel wall, enough for a body to get through, and that's been all over the paper and the news this morning. So I don't know if he planted it and saying, "See, we need concrete, we don't need a steel wall, whatever."
Well, and once again, the real serious practicality of people being pressed upon and made to be pawns because of this, and that's very important. I mean, they're not getting money. They don't seem to be moving the needle one way or the other. But to me as well, it's just fascinating what people are relying on to continue making their case. And some people just don't seem to want to back away from any suspicious evidence, this, that, and the other. And they keep finding people who support Trump who seem convinced, which I think is important. We talk about things like TSA and how this is really going to affect people with their behavior and what they think. If people begin to think that I'm not flying because these people are mad, they're not doing their jobs and not being paid, the same thing with the idea that these folks are just reacting to totally bogus, made-up figures, numbers, and whatnot. But we don't care. Much like the president, we want the wall for a laundry list of reasons, and they just seem immovable.
I have to agree. Some of the people are going right to the agencies like the DEA as far as immigration. It's a trend going downward. The one area that they've identified that there is a problem that we're not prepared for is families. Women and children. It was all set up years ago for males coming across the border, where our facilities aren't there, and that's part of the fundage that the Democrats said is inclusive into their $1.4 or $1.3 billion proposal.
If you listen to TSA people, I mean not TSA, the Border Patrol people.
Yes.
That's the thing that they're not used to, that they're not set up for, is women and children cross the border. And they're from Honduras or Guatemala and claim asylum. Under U.S. law, you get a hearing if you claim asylum. And if you're from Mexico, they can ship you right back. But if you're from anywhere else, you get to make an asylum claim. And people have been coming across more than last year, and they tend to be women and children, and so you have to house them. And the Border Patrol is law enforcement. They're not set up to give out. So if there is an emergency at the border, that's what it is. But a fence or a wall doesn't. What do you do? Stop them in Mexico, kind of like they've done with the so-called caravan or that group of people that came up that are stopped over there.
Tijuana.
Yeah, and that's still in court as to whether the president can do that or not.
And again, not that this is going to change anybody's mind necessarily. We can't know. This is very, very sad the way folks are approaching it. But I think it's completely accurate to say that Trump is not a very good or clever demagogue, but he's just demagoguing this issue, and the people who are supporting him are not really helping.
Yeah, I think he's trying to utilize his business technique with government, and it doesn't work.
Well, again, people are watching this and they're reacting to it, and I suppose the people who desperately believe we need a wall believe that all the illegal drugs and criminality invested in these people, that they're just streaming through the wall. And the best evidence that we have that most people are willing to consider just doesn't bear that out.
Yeah, the agencies show that the entrance to large amounts of illegal drugs are coming through our normal ports of entry, not the wall.
Those people are clever. They're getting the stuff in here.
Yes, they are. All kinds of ways.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, most of these Democrats have argued for and supported and voted for reform at the border, secure border that has included walls before, on numerous occasions.
That was the Schumer fencing
including last February. Last February, there was a bill that had passed the House, and they were negotiating in the Senate as to what they were going to do. The bill eventually failed. That was basically the president gets $25 billion for a wall and border security, but $25 billion in exchange for legalizing. I don't know exactly whether they would be citizens or just here legally, the dreamers.
Right.
And it wasn't $800 million, which is what you normally is that
800,000.
800,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It was 1.2 million illegals, people who are here illegally, which included dreamers and some other people would be here. That was the deal. That was on the table. Everybody was going to vote for it, and at the last minute, the president. I understand had pressure from the Freedom Caucus guys, said, we want to add to it. We want to also end chain migration. That is, if you come here, then you eventually can get your family here. And we want to limit the number of the people who are coming to only those that we choose that have some economic value, computer programmers and that kind of thing. But we don't want farm workers or whoever we choose. That was added at the last minute, and it killed the deal. Okay? So the president had $25 billion for his wall in February if he'd wanted it.
Wow.
And the chain migration feature of immigration here is decades old, so that's a big consideration. But as Joe was saying, that those people decided that we want to use whatever leverage we have to get even more. And, of course, he's exactly right. We're not talking about $5.7 billion. It was $25 billion, and DACA Plus ruined it.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, the calculation they made was that if they pushed hard on the president's campaign promises, which I better not go there. I can't remember if he talked about chain migration and all of that in the campaign or if that came later. But they made a calculation that it would help them in the 2018 off-year elections, help them hold the House if they were really strong on immigration. It didn't. And so when they actually negotiated the financing bills, that are now on the table, there's only 1.6 that the Democrats would agree to instead of 25 billion.
Yeah.
And the Trump wants 5, but he had 25 before. So
I don't think people bring that out.
They made a really bad calculation, and
well, and one
here
of
we
the
are.
One of the worst parts of the calculation, I think, is that all of a sudden it would appear that these folks in the Republican Party, in the Freedom Caucus, and the folks really over on that side of the scale supporting Trump, his campaign promises, you name it, were all of a sudden deeply and abidingly wedded to dealing with people who've broken the law. They saw it evidently that simply, and these people are here illegally. They've broken the law, and we can't let them get away with it. That's part of the argument, and that hasn't helped at all.
Yeah, they're using that as the ammunition to keep the emotive component alive and well and wiggling.
So
interesting. Something down the road. What about, I've heard as of this morning, a release concerned on the part of our food resources here in the United States as far as whether or not they're going to be contaminated or not, because there's no one evaluating the lettuce.
According to an article, a piece I read yesterday, what we're actually looking at, maybe I shouldn't bring this up. Maybe people would feel better if I didn't talk about it, but the USDA and all those agencies that do that kind of thing, and basically they make what amounts to 22 surprise searches and that sort of thing a day.
Wow.
Throughout the entire country. That's it. So they perform a very, very valuable service, but they don't want, like people who want to fly, they certainly don't want us to get upset about the food supply. And I have no idea what that's going to look like.
These are the kinds of pressures that eventually will lead to some solution. So I don't think it's going to go on for years because, if there's a big public outcry, depending on who the public seems to be blaming, one side's going to cave or they're going to compromise or who knows.
Okay. I'm going to really drop a couple on your lap.
But if you ask us to come back in a month, I don't think it'll be fixed yet.
Well, I'm going to ask you right now. We've identified some areas of concern that if this is indeed prolonged, since it's the longest in the history of the United States as of today. If we prolong it for another month, just from not only the 800,000 that are government employees that are currently furloughed or being asked to work for no pay, what do you foresee as far as the whole picture, all of society, the ramifications? Will it be enough of the outcry, like you said, Professor Green, that there's going to be a forced compromise, even though we have a Democratic House now in effect with a lot of young people and we have a Republican Senate? Do you think that is there any, I know right now, as of we're talking right now, doesn't seem to be any hope of any wiggle room whatsoever, but what do you foresee based on your expertise, or what would you like to see, I guess?
Well, we've already had a game changer, and I don't know how useful or productive this response will be, but given what happened in November of 2016, who knows? I mean, logical, reasonable people, I don't think will want Americans to suffer any more than absolutely necessary, but that seems like a no-brainer to me, but folks are reacting to this in some very unhelpful ways. It's really hard. A month from now, that's really difficult to say.
Okay. Professor Green?
Again, there's some, if there are some bottleneck areas that develop, maybe agriculture could be one. My guess is the airports, that there'll be a public outcry, and then everybody is going to have to make a calculation as to how this will help in the 2020 election. Is this going to, on balance, get me elected, or is this on balance going to make sure I get defeated? And the Congress and the Senate are going to do that. I don't know what the president does about that, because he deeply believes that that there are people in the United States who support him against the elites, and that he can, if he's strong and upsetting the system and a little upset here and a little upset there won't matter. He did that with tariffs. Okay, tariffs are harming various aspects of the economy now, but his view is it's okay. They're good patriotic Americans, those farmers who can't sell their soybeans in China, and they'll weather it, and we'll make great trade deals and get back. And can he make a deal with people who absolutely despise him and don't want to give him anything that might help him in the election? I just don't know how that plays out. So I'm like Dr. McLeod. I don't see where this goes. I'll be pleasantly surprised when it all gets worked out, if it gets worked out, because I don't know how it'll happen. I can't. I don't have a sense of how it's going to work.
It's because some of the normal patterns are there. Some aren't. I think everybody would hate to see some crisis at an airport someplace that involves security, and I don't know which would get people riled up first, or some important segment of the food supply that becomes contaminated because it's not being properly inspected. I mean, that would be awful. Nobody wants to see that happen, but that might motivate people to push back, change sides, do something. But it would be pardon me, really, really terrible for it to have to come to that.
If it does get to this critical state, 30 days out, I mean, could the system possibly work whereby the Senate and the House come to an agreement on a proposal that puts on the president's desk, and he vetoes it, and it goes back, and do you think there might be an override utilizing the system by the Congress to make it go into effect? Can we do something like that?
It can happen, but with the people sitting in the two houses of our federal legislature, who knows?
Yeah.
That's outside of my sense of the possibilities right now.
Right.
But again, some bad emergency at an airport, somebody blows up an airplane because the baggage wasn't searched correctly because somebody wasn't able to be there one day. Congressmen are self-interested and will, do what they need to do in order to get this past them. But it's got to go to the president's desk, and he's unpredictable.
Yeah, and everybody said that.
Well, and as oversimplified as it may sound, it would be awful to have to deal with something like that and then push these folks ultimately to decide, which is the way I see it. Do you want to do something reasonable to help our republic, or are you still just totally focused on whether your actions are going to get you reelected? I mean, they deal with that every day.
Yeah, they do.
But
by their own respective parties putting pressure on them.
Because we can use checks and balances, and the Republicans in the legislature are just they have been as politicized in a partisan manner, more so than they have in a long, long time, and they just don't want to risk his ire, and it's a very strange scenario.
Okay. Here's another thought going along with that. I know it's outside of your realm of even thinking that the system's going to work, but if these 800,000 people who are not getting paid, and we're talking 30 days from now, and they're starting to renege on their mortgages and on food and things of that sort, do you think the American people will contact their fellow representatives, both in the Senate and the House, and saying, hey, enough's enough. We expect these people to work for the federal government, where we're not going to pay for them, and they're going to be suffering. And I mean, are we going to see enough scenarios through social media and enough press coverage that whereby story after story, even in our own areas, that is going to raise sensitivity, and for us to do you think that's going to happen? In other words, the system's really going to work, or are we dreaming?
A people wave to match the blue wave?
Yeah. Well,
I don't know. This is one of the most surprising eras of political behavior we've ever seen. again, one more time, I'll go back to 2016. The most highly paid, knowledgeable political pundits in the world mostly all got it wrong. So when you start asking about that, again, who knows?
Got it.
My guess is that one side will say those people are suffering because the other side won't compromise, and the other side will say those people are suffering because the other side won't compromise. Again, I don't think that'll do it. I think it'll take some big emergency.
Some kind of a catastrophic event?
Yeah.
That's scary.
I think rationality has to match up with electoral interest before it's going to work.
No, and that's scary. Nobody wants to see
I agree.
Nobody wants
that's
to see
a great
that.
term, but that's what it is.
Nobody wants to see it happen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Green, Dr. McLeod, thank you for spending time with us talking about the government shutdown. And you've given a lot of insight for things to consider. And you sound a little bit frustrated like I am and maybe the majority of the American people are. But I would really like to have you come back in 30 days, if possible. And let's see where we are then and what transpired. Let's hope that the government shutdown has been resolved by that time and that we're getting back on even keel. And whether or not a wall's being built or not, we'll find out. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Tips for Today, Topics, Issues, and Positions. You can hear this program today on Fridays at 3 o'clock and rebroadcast at 5 p.m. on Saturdays. You can also view those handsome gentlemen sitting across from me on the Facebook as well as Twitter. Our podcast affiliate is Podbean. And I guess you can order Alexis to pull it up. Just say Tips and then the program of choice here at Radio St. George. So for me right now, we're going to stay tuned for us next week for another interesting program. And I want to thank, again, Dr. Green and Dr. McLeod for taking time out of their busy schedule here at Dixie State University and giving us their opinions on the government shutdown. Until then, you'll hear from us, and if you want to take a look at us on Facebook, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.